As the courtroom doors swung open, the atmosphere was alive with electricity. This wasn't just any court session, and everyone knows it. The sister wives faithful had waited for today, and today, the secrets of Kody Brown were going to be exposed once and for all. The shutters on the cameras went click, 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 and all faces were fixed on the family, which had made its name a household name for years. Kody Brown appeared, his face set, but with a hint of tension belied by the turmoil within him. His wives, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and Robyn, trailed closely behind him, each of them entering the courtroom with a sense of fear, resolve, and sadness in equal measure. Though they had some challenges ahead of them, they had long since learned to anticipate the storm, but this one still caught them off guard. Even before the judge adjourned the meeting, you could sense the tension in the room. All eyes and cameras were fixed intently on the wives, eager to get even a glimpse of their reactions through their facial expressions. Christine, who normally tried to keep the peace, seemed particularly agitated, her hands grasping her curse as if it might be her only salvation. Janelle, whose normally soft and gentle face reflected her warm heart, now appeared cloudy with worry and fear in her eyes. Robyn, who normally tried to keep things in perspective and keep the family in line, radiated quiet, seething fury. And Meri, whose wife of 17 years had struggled with her under countless misunderstandings and difficulties, appeared simultaneously terrified and resolute, as if she'd steeled herself for the battle that lay ahead. Finally, the judge called the court to order, and the room was filled with silence. All eyes were aware that this was no ordinary legal case. It was a case that was going to be a full-blown courtroom fight and would lay bare the deepest and darkest secrets of one of the most famous families on television. Certainly, the public was aglow on their media networks and eagerly awaiting the outcome of all that was going to take place. Right from the start, it was evident that this season was going to stretch everyone's patience and trusting abilities. The lawyers who were representing the wives had mountains of information and data in terms of text messages, documents, and testimonies that offered to reveal all that had been rumored to have happened for so long. Fans had been guessing for years about what had been going behind Kody's closed doors. This tension intensified as the first words were spoken. The wives were given the opportunity to speak, to voice how they were feeling, and to confront the truth that had been developing for so long. Meri's voice shook with effort as she attempted to put words to the silent pain she had been suffering with all these years. Janelle's hands were shaking as she was holding her copy of her speech. It was clear to anyone who was looking at her photographs of the ceremony and the ring, which she was pointing to as she spoke. Christine, the mediator, was having trouble controlling her own feelings of hurt and confusion. And Robyn's calm facade was replaced with one of tense vigilance, as she seemed to be steeling herself for all the secrets that were to come. Before the secrets were even out in the open, the room was electric with emotion. Whispers circulated through the crowd, rumors flew on Twitter, and the cameras of the journalists recorded every facial expression. Those watching from the comfort of their own homes felt the power of this moment, not simply a reality television show, but a seismic shift that could very well destroy the very foundation upon which the Brown family was built. The atmosphere in the courtroom was a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and anticipation. Each and every move, look, or hesitation of Kody or his wives held great importance. The wives were known for their loyalty, patience, and ability to handle the complexities of polygamous life. But now, for the first time, their world seemed to be on the verge of a collapse. The opening seconds of the trial established the tone of what was to come. Just the sound of the judge's voice, coping well in the heavy tension, had difficulty breaking through as lawyers launched into their opening statements. Everyone in the courtroom, as well as the media, was eagerly anticipating the fact that these announcements were merely the opening salvo in what was to come. Kody, always so sure of his manhood and his position, looked almost shaken. He was listening intently to the accusations and the evidence, sometimes squirming uncomfortably on his seat, his face a mask of carefully maintained neutrality and tentative anxiety. This was a moment of vulnerability he had not revealed on the reality show before, and the audience was surprised to see this side of him. The women finally felt a validation of their doubts and fears for all these years. The room was electric with anticipation as the attorneys began presenting the first evidence. Text messages were read aloud, financial paperwork flashed on screens, and witnesses were called to the stand. Each piece sparked a further complication and an emotional response from the onlooking spouses, who gasped, shook their heads, and clamped their lips shut as they fought back tears. Janelle, normally so composed, fought to hold up her dignity against the bombshells that dropped around her. "I don't believe this," she whispered, the words barely audible above the hum of the courtroom voices. Even Christine, attempting to give a reassuring smile, couldn't conceal the shock that threatened to consume them all. Robyn's jaw clenched in rage, while Meri's eyes welled with tears, struggling to contain the grief, the pain, and the glimmer that remained of hope in finding the truth. Meanwhile, in and out of the courtroom, the drama has been caught by either fans or media coverage, and every reaction, every expression has been analyzed. Social media sites are filled with chatter, rumors, and condolences regarding the family's predicament. The action is not only present in the courtroom, but ripping apart on the internet, with millions of individuals following the Brown family saga for years. The session continued with increasing intensity. The attorneys were careful in their questioning and presentation of evidence, leaving no doubt whatsoever. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, as every piece of information revealed a blow to the walls of trust built by these wives. Kody, trying to keep his act together, could do nothing but be affected by his own deeds, feeling the weight of truth bearing down upon him in his tensed shoulders and shaking voice when he finally broke his silence. The first session had ended, and now the courtroom had turned into a platform for emotions. There were tears, there were shaking voices, and the jury was able to see a different side of the Brown family, one which was far removed from the world of reality shows. The emotion here was unrestrained, raw, and taking place in front of a very watching public. It was obvious that this was not the end of it yet. This first session had opened the door to all the dramatic revelations that would be exposed in this court of justice, and had every onlooker in that courtroom and every TV viewer at home dying to know what would happen next in this family's life story that would never be the same again. The audience around the world held their breath, their feelings echoing those of the wives in the courtroom. The family of fan sisters was ready for a series of disclosures that shocked, saddened, and enthralled them, creating one of the most memorable moments of reality television. But as the gavel was finally brought down to conclude the first session, the wives walked out of the courtroom with broken hearts. Kody was still seated, visibly shaken, and the public was left demanding to be satisfied of more truths, more answers, and more information regarding the secrets kept concealed for far too long. The stage is now fully set for the next episode, where the secret will be brought out into the open, where the emotions will reach the boiling point, and where drama will be experienced as never before. The second session kicked off into a tense hush. If the first session had been the build-up, this was it. The dam of hidden truths was about to burst. The suspense was almost unbearable, as one knew that something monumental was about to occur. Everybody in that room family members, lawyers, media, and the public could sense it. And fans at home, glued to their screens, were preparing themselves for a revelation to shake the Brown family to its core. The lawyer for the wives got up slowly, cleared their throat, and said, "Your Honor, we are here today not just to present facts, but to reveal a pattern of secrecy and manipulation that has deeply affected this family." Their voice was steady, yet carrying a weight that made the room lean in en masse. "The evidence we present will show decisions made without transparency, choices that have caused emotional, financial, and personal turmoil." The first pieces of the puzzle came into focus as he began to lay out the evidence. A lawyer read some text messages that were between Kody and other parties. Words of deception, omission, and secrecy that came forth as read to the courtroom listened intently. Some messages indicated Kody had been making crucial family decisions without even consulting with his wives, some of which had involved finance, property investment, and even personal issues of direct relevance to their relations. Janelle's face whitened as the messages were read. Her good composure, well kept thus far, showed signs of crumbling. Shaky, she clung to the arms of her chair, and her eyes welled with tears. "Can't believe this," she muttered under her breath. The audience gasped. Even her sisters in marriage, Meri, Christine, and Robyn, appeared shocked. Even Christine, the peacemaker of the family, could hardly conceal the rising anger in her eyes. Robyn, more strong-willed, clenched her fists under the table, her face taut as the words on the screen finally filtered into her brain. It wasn't all just about text messages. Next came financial documents and contracts, showing how Kody made decisions unilaterally. Investments had been made, properties bought, family funds apportioned without the knowledge or consent of his wives. The implications were enormous, not just financially, but emotionally. Each wife's trust had been chipped away, brick by brick, and the courtroom was to bear witness to the unraveling of years of careful patience. It only grew more tense with the introduction of an audio recording. The hushed, nearly inaudible conversation captured Kody discussing plans that include secrecy and manipulation. Every word sent a ripple of disbelief through the courtroom. Each wife reacted very visibly. Tears streamed down Janelle's face. Meri's hands shook as she held her papers, and Christine's normally calm voice was wavering with frustration. Robyn looked hurt and quietly angry. That was a point of no return for Kody. The evidence was clear, and he had little leeway. He tried to explain, to show that he did what was apparently best for the family. "I was trying to protect the family," he said, his voice steady, though faltering at times. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," but the courtroom could see right through it. The proof spoke differently of secrets, manipulations, and decisions based on their personal interests, and not on the good of all. The most shocking part of the revelation wasn't even financial. It was a case of personal relationships and emotional boundaries having been crossed in ways that none of the wives had anticipated. The lawyer carefully outlined various instances where Kody had withheld information, manipulated situations, or made choices without consultation. Each revelation was a blow, not only to the wives' trust, but to their sense of security within the family. Meri, often cast as the quiet and patient wife, completely lost her composure. Her voice was shaking and raw as she echoed through the courtroom. How could he, after everything? How could he hide this from us? It was one of those moments that resonated with viewers everywhere, as the very human side of betrayal mixed in with that deep hurt when trust is violated. Janelle's response was just as potent. Her sobs were audible, her whole body shaking as she tried to grapple with the magnitude of the betrayal. The loving and forgiving one, who usually acted as a bridge between Kody and the other wives, now found that bridge broken. The emotional impact was raw, real, and heart-wrenching. Christine, the voice of reason within the family, voiced her frustration aloud. "We trusted you. We stood by you through everything. And this was how you repaid us?" It was like a storm of lightning in the courtroom, and she made no bones about the wives being hurt to that extent. Robyn generally acted as the balancing factor, but this time round, her anger could barely be contained. She had been calm, calculated, and understanding for years now, but this revelation just pushed her over the edge. The tears, the silence, and the visible tension spoke volumes. The Brown family had crossed into uncharted territory. The onlookers in the courtroom could barely hold their reactions, let alone the journalists and fans. Social media just exploded as people shared their shock, anger, and sympathy for the wives. Clips of the session went viral almost the minute it happened, with fans expressing shock over Kody's actions. "I followed this family for years, and I never imagined this," one viewer commented online. Another wrote, "The wives deserve better. This is heartbreaking." The emotional whirlwind was second to none as the lawyer meticulously presented every evidence. Every document, every testimony, every recording, this all was another nail in the coffin of Kody's credibility. The courtroom now became an arena of emotional confrontation, which has brought into reality the reality of consequences for Kody. The judge, while professional and stoic, closely watched the interactions but often intervened to keep order and, quite obviously, was scathed by the raw emotion in the room. What made this session even more shocking was the layered complexity of the revelations. It wasn't simply a matter of financial mismanagement or withheld information. The evidence pointed to one big consistent pattern of secrecy, decisions behind closed doors, emotional manipulations that undermined the confidence of the wives, actions that had created deep rifts in a family already navigating an unconventional lifestyle. For the wives, the effect was instantaneous and visceral. Trust, once the bedrock of their relationships, had been violated. The emotional after-effects registered in every glance, every tear, and every muttered word. Viewers who watched the exchange could feel the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, no different than they had sat in the courtroom themselves, seated among the visibly distraught participants. Kody then tried to take control over the explanation process, apologizing for the flaws in his reasoning. However, the effects could not be undone. His words rang with sincerity in tone, but without proof, they wouldn't outweigh the mountain of evidence. The air was thick with tension, unbelief, and sorrow in that courtroom. The wives looked as if their faces had seen years of struggle, resilience, and a deep sting of betrayal. This session would be well etched in the minds of all present. By the end of Session 2, the full impact of that bombshell revelation had sunk in. The wives were forced to face the reality of what Kody had done, and viewers were reeling from the aftermath. It was not simply another reality TV scandal. It was a human story of deceit, heartbreak, and the delicate nature of relationship trust. The questions really hung in the air for fans worldwide. How would the family move forward? Could trust ever be rebuilt? And what other secrets might still be hidden? The answers were uncertain, but one thing was for sure. A turning point for the Brown family had come, and the courtroom was now the stage for one of the most shocking emotional moments in reality television history. The tension didn't break when the session adjourned. The wives were visibly shaken as they left the courtroom, their emotions raw and unfiltered. Kody sat for a moment, reflecting on the weight of the evidence that would come against him. Outside, the public huddled around social media, analyzing each moment, every facial expression, and each teardrop. This was more than entertainment. This was a real, emotive, and very human story unraveling right before their very eyes. The second session had done more than expose secrets. It had laid bare the heart of a family in crisis. It had portrayed the emotional toll of betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the deep effect of secrecy. And viewers, both fascinated and appalled at the same time, knew that the story of Kody Brown and his wives had barely just begun. The succeeding sessions would have even more exposures, emotional confrontations, and dramatic turns that were never expected. By the end of this session, one thing was certain: the Brown family would never be the same. For millions of fans, the courtroom drama was only the beginning of a story that would continue to shock, inspire, and create discussion into the next many years. The courtroom, already ripe with tension stemming from revelations made public in the previous session, seemed to hold a collective breath as it witnessed the beginning of the third session. Where the first session had worked to create suspense, and where the second session had worked to reveal secrets, this was where emotions longed to come crashing, raw, unfiltered, and to the point of being impossible to overlook. The wives, back in their homes, could feel this as they realized the truth. The judge adjourned the court, but there was a hum of whispering and murmurs in the room. The reporters fervently wrote notes, and the wives sat poised and shaking in anticipation of what was to follow. Meri, a normally silent and reserved woman, was determined and had her hands clasped tightly across her notes. The eyes of Janelle were red from lack of sleep and months of tough times. The cool and collected woman, Christine, was clearly shaken to her foundations. The anger of Robyn was evident from her clenched jaw and white-knuckled grip on her notes. The hearing commenced with the attorney encouraging the wives to go straight to Kody. "It is time to speak your truth," the attorney said boldly. "This is your time to verbalize the hurt, the confusion, and the betrayal that you have all felt." The courtroom leaned forward apprehensively, realizing that this is the onset of an emotional tornado that will not be easily controlled. Meri was the first to speak. "For years, I have striven to trust, to forgive, to maintain the family unit intact," Meri began, her voice shaking yet imbued with a quiet power. "But I recognize now that the trust given has been squandered, taken for granted. I feel betrayed." As Meri spoke, the courtroom grew silent, Kody even appearing momentarily taken aback by the depth of emotion in her voice. Perhaps it was the first time he had really acknowledged the hurt in his actions. Then came Janelle's time to shine. She stood up, her notes clutched in her hand, her hands shaking noticeably. "I have always believed in us, in our family, and in love," she began to say, her voice trembling from emotion. "How can I continue to believe when the truth has been hidden from me? How can I stand here and pretend that none of this has ever happened to me?" The viewers at home were caught up in her pain and heartbreak and felt every ounce of her suffering. Christine, who often acted as the mediator in the family, spoke with a voice that held both sorrow and frustration. "I've spent so much of my life trying to understand, trying to maintain peace," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "However, it is simply not possible to understand without truth. And now that the truth is here, it is clear that all of us have been manipulated." These were not only the sentiments of the judicial proceedings, but also the spectators across the world who had been watching the family drama for all these years. Robyn, who had been keeping so much of her anger inside in past therapy sessions, finally lost it. Her husky voice, laced with anger and sadness, rang out in the room. "I held my tongue for too long, hoping things could be different," she said, her eyes welling up with tears in them. "But silence is not safety. Silence is complicity. I trusted my husband, but now I realize it was all in vain." The courtroom was taken aback by the candidness in her words, reality hitting them like a tidal wave. Kody tried to answer him, but he struggled to keep his voice steady and calm. "I never intended to cause you or any of you pain," he said, nodding towards his wives. "I just wanted to protect our family," he continued. but he stopped when he realized that his words only landed as empty reassurances. Kody realized that he didn't need to justify himself, and he certainly didn't need to apologize anymore for things he wasn't even directly responsible for yet. He simply needed to acknowledge just how much pain he'd caused, as he realized that he saw just as much pain in each of their faces as he felt in his heart, and they weren't asking for anything in return. The emotional repercussions were still present as the wives related what their experience had been of Kody's behavior. Meri spoke of sleepless nights and feelings of isolation and helplessness. Janelle expressed the experience of being victim to ongoing feelings of dread and self-doubt that had haunted her for the past months. Christine related what it had been like to work to keep the family whole while maintaining a facade of not being hurt herself. Robyn expressed feelings of frustration and the loss of her feelings of safety in the family. Then, for a moment, the judge paused in recognition of the gravity of the situation. "Counselors," the judge asserted, "do not forget to keep order in your room. But I also recognize the gravity of your feelings. It is a grave situation, and one can see that this family has had to undergo much hardship. It is clear in this instance that the situation had reached a point of gravity in which the feelings were no longer denied." The viewers, both on and off set, were enthralled. The social media platforms were filled to the brim with messages and reactions from viewers. "I can't believe this is taking place," a viewer posted on Twitter. "The heartbreak is real. These women have experienced enough." Someone else posted, "Consequences of Kody's behavior," and they posted a photo of Robyn, Meri, Christine, and Vicky looking absolutely devastated. As the meeting went on, the wives started questioning Kody directly. "Why would you keep this from us?" Meri asked, shaking with emotion. "Why would you decide this on your own?" Janelle expressed the same frustration. "We're your wife. You've hurt us." Christine's tears flowed as she continued, "I asked you for honesty, and instead, you gave me deception." Robyn's questioning cut like a knife. Why would the truth ever become more important than control? Kody's struggles to react to all of this were met with silence, incredulity, and underlying lashings of hurt on the part of his wives. It became clear that this hour was not going to be about defense. It was all about accountability. They were bearing all to make Kody confront the consequences of all of this in such a public manner. The emotional after-effects weren't only expressed in the words. Bodily expressions, such as the presence of tears, shaking hands, clenched fists, and sobs, also called out loudly. Although the husband's side responded differently to the situation, according to their background and adaptation level, the collective pain of being wronged was the same. In the courtroom, the scenario was typical of the vulnerability and strength that humanity displays when a family faces a crisis under the scrutiny of the public. Even the media and audience could feel the intensity. Photographers recorded the moments of crying, the looks of rage, the instances of stunned silence. Reporters rushed to put down their quotes, knowing that this press session would top the headlines tomorrow. Viewers at home reflected the feelings they saw happening before them: shock, rage, empathy, and a deep connection to the wives' plight. Perhaps the most telling of these occurred when Janelle, still shaking, spoke directly to Kody. "I loved you with all of me," she said, her voice trembling, "but you still managed to betray us all." "This is not just about making mistakes," Kody's fourth wife, Meri, offered later, "because trust is what makes or breaks the relationship." Kody, however, had no such reservations against the fourth wife, Robyn, and he continued his emotional assault on Janelle, telling her, "My need is entirely different from yours. I need you, but I need myself more, and I need the space I have with you," adding, "My intimacy is not." Robyn's testimony shook the courtroom with the force of lightning. "I will no longer remain silent. I will no longer accept excuses. I demand honesty, respect, and transparency. Her strength and passion were an exemplar of the emotions felt not only by the wives, but also inspired the audience to empathize with them. We've suffered so much, trying to hold our family together, trying to believe in something greater than ourselves. Christine, composed but clearly agonized, succinctly conveyed the devastating consequences of such emotional trauma. But belief is destroyed by deception. Our hearts have been broken, and the wound is very real. The end of the third therapy session marked a point where the consequences of their emotions were at their strongest. The wives had aired their truth, confronted Kody, and shared the extent of the hurt they were experiencing, leaving the courtroom and viewers bemused. This therapy session was more about the consequences of trust and the strength needed to overcome a broken heart. Fans at home were left exhausted and wondering what would happen next in reaction to Kody's behavior and what would lead the reaction in their family dynamics. Fans on social media were abuzz with chatter and support for the wives as they reacted and speculated on the impact that this episode would have on their family dynamics. The heartbreak is real, or these women are so strong for speaking out. The third session ended with the wives departing the courtrooms with tear-drenched faces, with expressions etched with anger due to betrayal, and with heavy hearts full of disappointment. Kody was left seated, analyzing the extent of emotional damage done to them, as they were finally realizing the extent of the gravity of his acts. All was set for another session to begin, where there would be exposure of many secrets. With even more drama, and when the family would be left at the point of breakage, there was no denying the emotional aftermath that had just occurred. It was a wake-up call that served as a reminder that while the cameras were rolling and the TVs were on, the emotion, the sadness, and the consequences were all real. A turning point had been reached in the story of the Brown family. Neither the women nor the viewers would ever be the same. It was clear that the fourth session was about to shed the last layer, with the first three sessions bringing to the fore the tension, the truths, and the consequences. All eyes were glued to Kody Brown, who knew that his own actions were about to be laid bare. Kody had been one of the key players in the first three sessions, and this one would show him to be no different. The hearing began as the attorney addressed the court with a sense of solemnity that was enough to mute the whole room. Your Honor, what we are about to share goes well beyond financial matters and miscommunication, the attorney stated. This evidence reveals a cycle of manipulation, deception, and betrayal of trust that has had a profound impact on this family for many years. These few words were enough to make all the wives in the room stiffen in their seats. They all knew that the outcome of the upcoming few minutes was going to be the turning point of their lives. The first revelation was related to financial decisions being made completely behind the backs of the wives. Files were shared showing purchasing of property, investment strategies, as well as big spends, all done by Kody without consulting any of the women in his life. The magnitude of financial secrecy was alarming in itself, but it is even more heartbreaking that these financial decisions were not trivial, affecting the long-term security of the whole family. Janelle's face went white as the papers were read aloud. All these years, and we trusted him, she whispered, her voice trembling. He got to make all these choices by himself? The pages quivered in Meri's hands as she scanned through them, understanding just how much Kody had been controlling behind the scenes when it came to the family's finances. Are you kidding me? Robyn could be heard muttering under her breath, clenching and unclenching her fists as she fought off her rage, while Christine, the mediator of all disputes, appeared dazed by what she was hearing. But the financial matters were only the tip of the iceberg. The attorney smoothly moved to the personal and emotional issues related to the family relationships boundaries, and issues of manipulation that had taken place within the family. Testimonies from insiders and evidence from private conversations showed that Kody had not always been upfront regarding the issues related to people outside the family that had an influence on the emotional well-being of the wives he had married. A shocked reaction went around the courtroom when it came to one of the pieces of evidence that revealed private communications Kody had been hiding. These conversations proved to show how Kody had been trying to manipulate circumstances and control the way in which stories were told in relation to the family. It was this fact that shocked all of the wives, and indeed all of those in the courtroom. Tears welled up in Meri's eyes when she appreciated how secretive Kody had been about his dealings. "It feels like my whole life has been secret from me," she told herself with anguish. The words that came from Janelle's lips trembled as she exclaimed, "What has he been doing to us?" The composed Christine had the breach turning her inside sour, while the normally diplomatic Robyn had reached the point where she was ready to face the reality about Kody's activity. The lawyer then proceeded to present audio recordings that had been made with the consent of the individuals involved. These recordings were perhaps the most incriminating evidence that had arisen thus far, as they included statements that involved Kody speaking about his intentions and decisions that his wives were not even aware of. Every word dripped like ice as it reached the ears of the jury. The wives could not listen, but they also understood that it had to be done. Kody tried to defend his actions when he said he was protecting his family and avoiding unnecessary conflict. But none of these explanations worked in his favor. The court was unconvinced. It was evident from the evidence being placed before them of a man who often disregarded his wives' suggestions and made decisions about every aspect of their lives. The disparity between Kody's motives and what happened as a result of his deeds was so large that it was hard to overlook. However, emotional intensity in the courtroom continued to build and reach epidemic levels. Meri began to speak, her words trembling with conviction, but resolute in their delivery. "This is far more than just money and small errors in decision-making. It is, in fact, relationships and honesty, and all of these things have been stripped away from us." Janelle, her eyes welling up, began to contribute. "We have been living in the shadow of choices that we never even realized existed in the first place. We gave our lives for this family in the name of love and loyalty." Christine's voice escalated with anger and pain. "But in return, we were kept in the dark and deceived. We were manipulated and our feelings were ignored. That's not protection. That's control." Robyn finally spoke up. "We trusted you, Kody. We believed in the family and in the love that we shared. And now it all seems like a lie." The courtroom was well aware of the power of their words. Each word spoke volumes to the effects of the deceit. The crowd, either in the courtroom or at home, was captivated. Twitter exploded in support of the wives and in disgust of Kody's conduct. Fans reacted to the hurt and the deceit in the manipulations. Posts such as "Wives deserve better" and "Betrayed of unimaginable levels" ran rampant. The lawyer then introduced examples of Kody's decision-making style. It was not a case of one or two incidents where Kody had made decisions without considering the other women. There was a clear pattern of decision-making regarding secrecy and manipulation. Issues of child schedules, finances, and personal issues had been taken care of without taking into consideration the input of the wives. The wives' responses ranged from heartbreak to anger. Meri cried silently, but her eyes conveyed messages. Janelle, using her handkerchief to wipe her face, looked almost dumbfounded by the level of deception that had been dished out to her. Christine was corrected on her facial expressions. Her features revealed sadness and anger. Robyn's clenched fists and her stern look revealed her anger was boiling over. Kody's motives, too, were questioned. The fact is, even Kody's rationalizations for his deeds were called into question. I thought I was doing what's best, he pleaded, wavering but resolute. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. However, there was no fooling the jury. The body of evidence spoke louder and clearer than any words. The therapy session had just reached a turning point with the lawyer's last piece of evidence, a timeline showing how Kody's actions had impacted the wives all these years. All the events, all the secrets, all the omissions had been laid out on the timeline, and the effect on the family had been recreated before everyone's eyes. The effect on the spouses had been immediate and palpable. With Meri holding on to the timeline with shaking hands, Janelle's sobs loud and audible, other spouses overcome with emotions, and Robyn gritting teeth with anger. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence as everyone was processing the reality of what had been revealed. The women had suffered for years under conditions of secrecy, trickery, and deception. And now the truth was clear. It was not only emotional, but was very personal, affecting every part of their lives and their relationships and identity within their family. Meanwhile, for the audience at home, this episode was a roller coaster ride. Fans shared their experiences through comments on various social media platforms. "I can't imagine going through all this," one fan wrote. Another wrote, "Emotional pain is so real that you can see it etched all over their faces." It was no longer mere drama in reality television. It had crossed the boundary to become a human experience of betrayal, resilience, and struggle to navigate trust within a family. As the session was ending, the wives were seen leaving the courtroom, visibly distraught. Their emotions were unfiltered and raw. Kody was still sitting in one of the benches, with a mixture of thought, regret, and confusion on his face. A summary of the session was provided, and it became clear that one of the key components of all family associations is keeping things honest and candid. It became obvious by the end of the 4th episode that the Brown family was at a point of no return. The secrets were all exposed, and the trust in their lives had fallen apart. Viewer anticipation heightened with the upcoming 5th installment of this family drama, as they anticipated what would come next with the impact of their family secrets exposed in front of each member. This episode had far more than just revealed some deep, dark secrets. It had shone a light on the Brown family dynamic and the raw effects of dishonesty and the strength that is required to come to terms with the betrayal that had taken place, said an observer, describing the anticipatory behavior of the audience after the episode had ended. The final trial in the courtroom drama opened with an uncomfortable silence, as if the very atmosphere sensed that everything had shifted. If the former sessions had opened doors on secrets, betrayals, and the emotional aftermath, the present one was about observing the aftermath of Kody Brown's behavior. As the women processed the rush of revelations that had entered their world, the courtroom was electric, and it had never felt like this before. The wives appeared tired, their faces wet from crying, and their look of anger, sadness, and determination could not be missed. For many years, they had endured the public eye, where they were scrutinized and judged and forced to deal with living under public observation. But now, however, the burden of the infidelity made itself felt, and it was plain to everyone in the courtroom what the cost of the betrayal had been. Meri was the first to speak, her voice softer but stern, laden with the suffering she had lived through. "I have spent years learning to believe, to trust, to hope," she said, her voice shaking not with fear, but with the building conviction that came from her years of trusting and hoping and being let down anyway. "And what I realize is that hope does not shield you from the act of being betrayed, from the choices that are made behind your back." Janelle, shaken to her core, began to add her voice to the mix. For a long, long time, I've been trying to tell myself that everything was going to be fine, and perhaps there was just a series of misunderstandings going on here. But this goes much deeper. It is about trust. And trust, once shattered, is not easily fixed. Her hands shook as she held her notes, yet her eyes had never wavered. The viewers at home felt her pain as though they too were living within this struggle of hers, a struggle of disbelief, of sorrow, and of anger. Christine always was the peacemaker, the voice of reason, so it was no surprise that it was her turn next. Her words were laced with emotion, even as her tone was calm. I have spent so long keeping peace within this family, keeping the bits that need smoothing smoothed, keeping everyone protected, she said. But there comes a point within any relationship, within any family, where peace simply is no longer sufficient, and without the building blocks of relationship, namely transparency, honesty, and respect, the very fabric we all depend upon unravels. Her words struck a chord within the courtroom, but it was clear that through the viewing audience, it struck a chord well beyond it as well. Robyn, who had maintained such a level of calm all the way up to now, finally let the feelings she had been holding inside come flooding out. We've all tolerated the silence. We've all tolerated the explanation that didn't even answer our questions. We've all had to deal with the deception and the secrets for far too long. She began, her words trembling with both pain and rage, and I will no longer participate in it. I deserve the truth, and I deserve to be treated with respect. And that's exactly what I will demand from now on. It is apparent that there has been emotional damage done, and that the erosion of trust has occurred. Though this court can chronicle events and settle some disputes, the work of healing and restoration comes as a personal matter. These are the words that came from the judge, as the parents were facing the reality that the emotional healing was the job of the family members themselves, and had nothing to do with the judicial system. In other words, the reality was that the healing would take place out of the public eye. As time went by, the wives began to consider their plans for what lay ahead. Some realized that there needed to be distance, both physical, emotional, and psychological, in order for them to deal with their trauma and keep themselves protected from any further pain. Some of them even weighed the possibility of reconciliation, but only with some clearly defined levels of accountability and honesty being put in place for them to proceed with their newfound path in their relationships. As touching as the above-mentioned scene was in the courtroom, the emotional ripple effects of the episode reached beyond the courtroom walls. Fans and media organizations analyzed every bit of it, triggering a storm of reactions on social media, which in turn increased the publicity surrounding the episode. Comments poured in, representing empathy, anger, and support for the wives. Fans shared experiences of their own pain of trust and rising above it, establishing a connection between the Brown family's experiences and their own. "Heartbreak is real," said one of the fans. "But so is their strength," said another, while the third went on to state, "Watching this reminds us all just how fragile trust is and how difficult it can be to restore." Despite the closing of the judicial session, the impact of the exposures still weighed heavily on everyone. The ladies departed from the courtroom exhausted, bearing the wounds of deception, secrecy, and manipulation within their relationship. Kody, who had tried to rationalize his behavior, stayed back in court for a moment, his look showing a sense of contemplation, guilt, and indecisiveness. It is possible that the jury also noted the effect on Kody himself, not only because of the legal ramifications, but also because he had his personal choices thoroughly laid bare and troublesomely analyzed. The episode has also served as a reflective piece, not only for the family, but for television viewers as well. Professionals in family law and psychology have commented on this issue, giving insights into how secrecy and manipulation can undermine a family relationship, even when it seems to be strongly and lovingly bonded on the surface. Of course, a family like the Brown family, which is dramatically entertaining television viewing, is far from unique in its struggles to achieve truth and honesty in its relationships. But back in the homes of the Brown families, there was a reflective mood. The wives began discussing boundaries, expectations, and what was to be done, while others concentrated on taking care of themselves and healing. Others worked towards mending trust issues. What was certain was that patience, empathy, and above all, truth were needed if progress was to be made. The hard, psychological tasks had just started. A very moving moment came when the wives were able to acknowledge a truth about their experience, a truth of both the pain and the strength they have shown in the wake of it. We have been hurt, yes, but we are standing. We have been betrayed, yes, but we still know love and forgiveness. That in and of itself is our strength, Christine continued, taking a deep breath. And now Janelle agreed. We can't see what the future holds, but what we do know is what we will and will not settle for. We will no longer settle for less. All this was recorded and aired in the media, and it created this huge narrative that went beyond the courtroom. Social media posts, newspapers, and conversations between fans contextualized not only the betrayal in this family, but also the strength of character shown by the wives. Fans were inspired by the honesty and openness in this family. This final episode, too, highlighted the universality of the story. Although the Brown family is under the spotlight with the presence of television cameras all around them, the elements of betrayal and moving on in life can be identified with anyone who has been left with broken trust and heart. It was possible for the audiences at home to relate to the situation of the wives. While adjourning the meeting, the judge had the last words. It has become evident in this case that the vulnerability and strength of family ties can be simultaneously revealed in this manner. While the judiciary can resolve some problems in family matters, the process of recovery of emotional injuries and distress calls for a lot of courage and honesty. In a family that has the strength in making tougher decisions in situations that can be difficult in life. The wives walked out of the courtroom with their heads held high, although there were tears in their eyes and exhaustion etched on their faces. The look on their face showed them struggling with heartbreak and determination, as if they realized that although the family had been brought to its knees, there was hope that they could rebuild, heal, and establish a family that is based on the truth. Kody, on the other hand, stayed in the courtroom to face the ramifications of what had just been revealed. As far as viewers at home were concerned, this episode brought about a sense of closure that was always going to leave something to look forward to. It was not a fully resolved story. Families and emotions were not something that were ever going to get wrapped up nicely. But it had been a complete enough arc emotionally that it allowed viewers to see the scope of the secrets and the hurt that had taken place on the way towards healing. The ripple effects of the courtroom revelations would go on to manifest in the private lives of the Brown family. But the public had watched something special. The power of 4 women in the face of deceit, the struggles that come with trust in complicated relationships, and the emotional resonance of the truth. The social media circles continued to hum, fans analyzing, talking about, and relating to the experiences of the wives, admiration expressed for the bravery that had been displayed. In the end, this episode proved the pain of betrayal can also be the catalyst of reflection, growth, and empowerment. The wives had lived through unimaginable levels of emotional pain, and yet they had come out the other side with a clarity, determination, and commitment to self-respect. For the viewer, it was both a lesson in the value of truth, trust, and integrity in any relationship, as well as a source of inspiration. As the courtroom began to empty, the wives all walked out together, each with their own thoughts, but all connected in their experience of the truth and reflection that took place. Kody Brown led alone, lost in thought at the impact of his choices. The story in the courtroom came to a close, but in reality it is only beginning and will keep viewers enthralled as they watch the unfolding drama of sister wives. The purpose of the 5th episode has now been achieved, and this is giving closure, reflections, and perspectives. The audience has the privilege of watching the consequences of the act of betrayal, the strength of the wives, and the long journey of learning to trust again. This is a fitting end to a story that has enthralled audiences, stirring their souls and giving them a dramatic and human account of love, betrayal, and bravery.